evolutionists realized that they can no longer rely on the fossil record to give them any support.
So, does the fossil record support common descent? Let us see if we can trace the evolution of a rather well-known organism through the fossil record. Let us begin our all-too-brief glimpse at but a few of the known transitional fossils. We're going to be starting with the invertebrate to vertebrate transition. Pikaia is one of the earliest known fossils with a proto-notochord. Uninozoan is a hemichordate, showing quite a bit of increased complexity and development over Pikaia. Hycoella is an early chordate. While lacking bones and movable jaws, it does possess other characteristics of modern vertebrates, such as gills, a brain, notochord, heart, and a circulatory system. Conodonts were eel-like organisms with eyes and fins with fin rays. They're known largely by their teeth. In the picture below, you can see a sampling of the different teeth on the head of a pin. Here, we see two examples of primitive fish. Placoderms were not only one of the earliest jawed fishes, but they were also one of the earliest vertebrate predators. Acanthodians shared characteristics of both bony fish as well as cartilaginous fish. Urolepis is a bony fish, which was the common ancestor to both modern ray-finned fish as well as lobe-finned fish. Osteolepis is an early lobed-finned fish already showing an amphibian-like skull and teeth. Eusthenopteron possessed an amphibian-like skull, but more importantly, the bones and muscle attachments of its fins were becoming extremely similar to those found in tetrapod limbs. Panderichthys was very tetrapod-like, possessing a flattened body as well as foot-like fins. When we come to Acanthostega, we see that the fin-to-foot transition is almost complete. In Tiktaalik, we see that the fins now possess wrist and finger bones, which are adaptations for bearing weight. Additionally, Tiktaalik possesses a neck, as well as lungs and gills. In Ichthyostega, we see that the shoulder and pelvis have also become very tetrapod-like. Additionally, it possesses a robust rib cage extremely similar to that found in tetrapods. Pteroplax is representative of early land amphibians. The skull bone patterns remain similar to Ichthyostega, and the remnants of gills can be found at the neck. Proterogyrinus possessed an amphibian-like skull, but the limbs and spine were beginning to take on reptilian characteristics. In Solenodonsaurus, we see the loss of the lateral line on the head. Lanomus and Paleothyrus are both small lizard-like organisms which retained an amphibian-like skull. Pelycosaurs were primitive synapsids with differentiated teeth and a hard palate. Therapsids were mammal-like reptiles possessing complex jaws and teeth. Their legs were vertically attached under their bodies, as opposed to laterally at their sides. In the proto-mammals, we see further development of mammalian skull characteristics. At last we arrive at early placentals. They were small and rodent-like organisms. So what about marsupials and monotremes? They diverged previously to the advent of placentals. In the case of marsupials, there exists a fairly strong fossil record. In the case of monotremes, we know them mostly from their jaws. Returning to placentals, early primates are known largely by their skull fragments and jaws. In this case, they still did not look much like modern primates, except that their teeth began to take on primate-like characters. We know the ancestors to Old World primates largely by their jaws and skull fragments, both of which lead to the conclusion that brain size was increasing, while the length of its nose was decreasing. Propylopithecus is an early ape known by its jaw. Its teeth became a defining characteristic for apes. Egyptopithecus is an anthropoid ape possessing a much larger and rounder brain. Proconsul possesses features of both apes and monkeys. This is also where we begin to observe sexual dimorphism. Keniapithecus, a descendant of Proconsul, is an ancestor to great apes and humans. Australopithecus afarensis was a slender and ape-like organism. It was also bipedal. Australopithecus africanus was even more slender than afarensis and possessed a larger brain. Its teeth possess similar characteristics as those found in species of the genus Homo. At long last, we arrive at humans. Homo habilis straddles the Australopithecine-Homo boundary. It possessed a larger brain, and is associated with the first primitive stone tools. However, it may represent two distinct species of Homo. Homo erectus had a much larger brain and a thick brow ridge. It is associated with much better stone tools, as well as the first use of fire. Archaic Homo sapiens possessed a brain size intermediate to H. erectus and modern humans. They also possessed a much less robust skeleton and teeth than their predecessors. Homo sapiens sapiens are modern humans. While our brain size has increased in comparison to archaic Homo sapiens, our skeletal and muscular system is less robust. Now, we know you're all asking, what about Neanderthals? Well, Homo neanderthalensis was a side lineage. They were very successful for a time, but they've gone extinct. Based on the current evidence, they did not contribute to the genome of modern humans.
So what they've done is they've come up with a very crafty alternative to the Darwinian concept of evolution. They call it punctuated equilibrium.
Punctuated equilibrium is a hypothesis which was put forward by the late Dr. Stephen Jay Gould and Dr. Niles Eldredge. In simplicity, punctuated equilibrium hypothesizes that evolution can occur in rapid bursts with slow anagenic change occurring during the interim.
The theory says evolution is stable for long periods of time. Then new species suddenly come into being, and others immediately become extinct.
Dr. Gould was a master of communicating his ideas to the public. As such, we feel that the response to this atrocious mischaracterization can best be answered by Dr. Gould's own explanation of his hypothesis. A new species can arise when a small segment of the ancestral population is isolated at the periphery of the ancestral range. Large, stable, central populations exert a strong homogenizing influence. New and favorable mutations are diluted by the sheer bulk of the population through which they must spread. They may build slowly in frequency, but the changing environments usually cancel their selective value long before they reach fixation. Thus, phyletic transformation in large populations should be very rare, as the fossil record proclaims. But small, peripherally isolated groups are cut off from their parental stock. They live as tiny populations in geographic corners of the ancestral range. Selective pressures are usually intense because the peripheries mark the edge of the ecological tolerance for the ancestral forms. Favorable variations spread quickly. Small peripheral isolates are a laboratory of evolutionary change. What should the fossil record include if most evolution occurs by speciation in peripheral isolates? Species should be static through their range because our fossils are the remains of large central populations. In any local area inhabited by ancestors, a descendant species should appear suddenly by migration from the peripheral region in which it evolved. In the peripheral region itself, we might find direct evidence of speciation, but such good fortune would be rare indeed because the event occurs so rapidly in such a small population. Thus, the fossil record is a faithful rendering of what evolutionary theory predicts, not a pitiful vestige of a once bountiful tale.
You see, this solves all kinds of problems intellectually for the evolutionists.
Not at all. The idea was not even very novel. Charles Darwin, as well as Alfred Russel Wallace, among others, proposed similar ideas. The difference is that Dr. Gould stressed peripheral population.
He doesn't have to look at the fossil record.
Comically enough, Dr. Gould was, and Dr. Eldredge is, a paleontologist by training, and both have studied the fossil record extensively.
I'm convinced that the idea of punctuated equilibria is really a desperate attempt to salvage evolutionary theory.
We are convinced that was an appeal to ridicule. Punctuated equilibrium is an explanation of some of the observations in the fossil record.
There is no evidence in the fossil record that one type of animal ever changed into another type of animal.
Do you still remember those transitional fossils that we covered previously?
Punctuated equilibria comes along and says that isolated populations of animals evolved rapidly and left no fossil trace.
No, it stated that isolated populations evolve rapidly, and finding fossils from the small peripheral population would be a challenge.